All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody for coming, especially our visitors from other schools, our community members. This is an amazing day, and I want to speak directly to the students that are in the room today before I introduce some of the folks that are going to introduce our special speaker. To the students that are in this room, you guys have been referred to as the I generation. You have never lived without the tool that you hold in your hand that you call a phone. And it is one of the most powerful tools because in an instant, you can communicate with each other and you can hear and see what's going on in the world around you. And you can use that tool to unite together and find a way to make a difference in this world. And that is what I want you to be thinking about today when you are listening to some of the stories of the past, because we spend time looking at history and understanding history so that we don't repeat history. And you are charged with that task as the future leaders and citizens that will make a difference in this world. So please know that I have the utmost faith in you as the future, that you will use the tools that you have been provided to make this world a better place. So, with that said, I'm going to introduce Senator Rob Wagner, who's going to explain a little bit about the project that he and Mr. Wiener and Claire Sanowski, who is one of our Lake Ridge Pacers, the project that they've been working on. And then we're going to get started with today. Thank you for being here. And please welcome Senator Rob Wagner.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. So my name is Rob Wagner, and I am your Oregon State Senator. And I'm also a member of the, can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm also a member of the Lake Oswego School Board. Let me ask you, so I have 4 kids here in the public schools, and I graduated from our local public schools. So where's River Grove? We have River Grove in the house? All right. What about Westridge? Westridge here? Okay. Lake Oswego High School made its way over? There we go. All right. And Lake Ridge. Where's Lake Ridge? Oh, yeah. There it is, right there. I had a feeling. I'm mugging to the audience like every good politician knows how to do. So a few months ago, I received an email to my state Senate account from 2 people, from Carol Sarnowski and Claire Sarnowski, who's a freshman here now at Lake Ridge, who you're going to hear from in a minute. And they asked me to meet at Starbucks just for coffee because they wanted to tell me a story and they wanted to give me a book. And I have a lot going on with my job, and I said, okay, these are constituents, and it's an election year, so I better, no, I'm just kidding. We had a delightful coffee, and I received a gift from them of Alter's book. And based on the book that I read, I knew that I had to meet this exceptionally incredible man. So he invited me out to his place in Hillsboro, and he made for me a smoothie, which is the best smoothie I have ever had in my entire life. He puts mango and blueberries and pears, and what he says is that his secret ingredient is love. And I spent 2 hours with Alter Wiener, and it changed my life. You are exceedingly fortunate because this incredible man has given over about 1,000 presentations to schools and community groups across the region. But there's so many kids that aren't able to hear Alter's story. And so working with Alter and working with Claire, we are bringing legislation next year into the Oregon State Capitol to make sure that students going forward across our state have the opportunity to learn about the Holocaust, to learn from Alter's story. So before I introduce my friend Claire, who will introduce our friend Alter, I have one question for you, and that is, will you help us? Will you help us next year when the legislature's in session to send an email, to make a phone call, or even better, if you can work it out with your teachers, to come to Salem, so that when Alter's testifying and when we have the bill up for public hearing, I think it would be so powerful to have you all there to experience the Capitol and help us pass this legislation. With that, I'm going to introduce Claire Sarnowski.
Hi, Lake Ridge. How are we doing today? Okay, as mentioned, my name is Claire Sarnowski. I'm a freshman here at Lake Ridge, and one of the reasons why Alter's story has been so powerful to me is I heard him first when I was in 4th grade. And being a 9-year-old and listening to his presentation really shaped the person I have become today. And I know that it will shape me for the future. This is so important to me because I know just how many of us and our generation are not aware of the atrocities that have happened and the genocides that are still going on today. That's why, with the help of Senator Rob WIENER and the help of Alter, I decided to reach out and try to get this mandated. So that is the thing of the past, and now people will be educated in Oregon. Alter WIENER is one of the very few Holocaust survivors still living in the Portland area. He has shared his life story in the state of Oregon and Washington with close to 980 audiences in universities, colleges, schools, churches, synagogues, temples, prisons, companies, and book clubs. He was interviewed by radio, TV personality, and newspaper. Mr. WIENER received an honorary law degree from Lewis and Clark College and a bachelor degree from Warner Pacific College, and the prestigious Americanism Medal from the Daughters of the American Revolution. Mr. WIENER's autobiography, From a Name to a Number, was published in April 2007. An autographed copy will be available to you at the end of the program for $20 down here. I also just want to encourage you to know that you guys can make change. You can initiate change and you can follow through with it. There's no age limit or maturity level. I believe in all of you guys that you can initiate change. And hopefully this one will be a change for not only the students, but also the state of Oregon. Thank you. Here is my friend, Holocaust survivor, Alter WIENER. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for being here, willing to listen to my story. When you look at this picture, and you look at me, you wonder, is this the same person? Yes, it is. I lived in New York for many years. I didn't talk about it. I realized that most people are not able to comprehend or even to believe. But coming to Oregon in the year 2000, I was approached by the Oregon Holocaust Research Center, and they asked me to share my story. I hesitated, but eventually I did present my first time in Century High School here in Hillsborough. A week later, the teacher gave me about 100 letters from the students. What did they write to me? Mr. WIENER, you changed my life. You saved my life. Then I realized that I'm doing something important. And it is not easy for me. I'm 92 years old, emotionally, physically, but based on those letters and those 88,000 letters that I've received so far, I feel a moral obligation to share my story as long as I'm able to. This is the way I looked when I was 18 and a half years old, when I was liberated by the Russian army on May the 9th, 1945. The Russian army, the doctors told me, sorry, young man, if you are going to live 2 years, it's going to be a miracle. Nothing in my body functioned. I was a skeleton. I could embrace my thigh with one hand. So you can imagine in what kind of condition I was at that point. Who am I? Where do I come from? I come from a little town in Poland called Chrzanów, 22,000 population, half Jewish and half Roman Catholic. As a little kid, I had a pretty good life, according to the standard of living or lifestyle in those days. Nothing to compare to the standard of living we have today. I went to a school, to a public school in the morning, to the religious school in the afternoon. I have a pretty good life. But on September the 1st, the German invaded our little town. You can see the town that I come from. The first thing what the German did, they murdered my father. They just shot him together with 36 other people and threw them into a pit for no reason. I didn't know about it. Later on, 3 months later, the Germans permitted to open that pit where they killed 36 innocent people. I was 13 years old when I looked at that partially decomposed face of my father. He was murdered on September 11, a very infamous date, 1939, and we opened that pit 3 months later in November. Picture yourself, me at being 13 years old, looking at my father's partially decomposed face. I was devastated. I have nightmares till this very day, looking at my father's partially decomposed face. This is a monument erected after the war for those victims. And this is the official document from the Polish government that my father was murdered on September 11, a very infamous day, but this was September 1939. When the Germans invaded Poland, the first decree was that I couldn't go to school anymore. My formal education ended at the age of 13. Would you like to know when I graduated from elementary school? Look here, in 1969, when I was 35 years old. And I graduated from high school when I was 35 years old. So you can imagine how lucky you are. I couldn't go to school. In those 88,000 letters that I received so far, there are thousands of letters from students telling me that I am going back to school, or that I don't intend to drop out and stay in school. Obviously, I'm very gratified that I made such an impact on so many young people. And I know how difficult it is if you don't have an education. I used to clean toilets when I came to New York. I had no profession. I didn't know the language. So this is a very important message about education. In 1941, the Germans knocked at the door of our apartment and they took my older brother away. 1 year later, in the middle of the night, the Germans knocked at the door. They looked at me. They didn't ask my age. They just told me, get ready. My stepmother pleaded with the German. He's such a young boy. He's 15 years old. Don't take him away from me. He needs a mother. I love that boy. What did the Germans do? They slapped on her face. You dare to question our action? And they took me away. I never had a chance to say goodbye to my stepmother and to my younger brother. What did the Germans do with me? They pushed me into a wagon like that. 80 people of different ages were pushed into that car. Nothing to eat, nothing to drink for a day and a half. We were all standing all the time. There was no room where to sit. I know, it's very difficult to imagine, but that is how it was. I have no reason to exaggerate, but that is how it was. After a day and a half in that wagon, I arrived to my first slave labor camp called Blechhammer in Germany. Upon arrival, I was beaten for no reason. And then something unexpected happened. One of those prisoners in that camp recognized me from my hometown, told me, "Do you know that your brother is in this camp?" I didn't know. So he took me to meet my brother. I didn't recognize my own brother. Not seeing him for 1 year, he deteriorated to such an extent that I couldn't recognize him. He was very pleased that we are going to be together, but on the other hand, he was very concerned, how will I be able to endure those terrible conditions in those camps? Just to give you an idea, time doesn't permit to go into much detail. The conditions in those camps. 24 people of different ages were housed in a very small room, 8 by 10. 3 bunks, no mattresses, just straw infested with roaches and lice. They gave us 2 slices of bread in the morning, and the bread was made out mostly of sawdust. Do you hear me? Sawdust. It wouldn't be edible to any person who has more or less a normal life. But we had no choice. Lunch, we never got lunch. And in the evening, coming back from a long day of hard work, they gave us a soup, which was very, very, very watery. But we had no choice. That's all we got. And the work was very, very difficult. And this is something which I learned at the very first day of marching to work. And please listen to it. I had the impression that only me, because I happened to be a Jewish boy, that I was oppressed. But marching to work, I saw so many different groups. Each group had a different badge or label. Who were they? Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, homosexuals, undesirables, prisoners of war. Maybe 30, 40 different groups. What did I learn? Every Jew was a victim, but not every victim was a Jew. Please remember that. Every Jew was a victim, but not every victim was a Jew. What do you see here? This is a German woman. Do you hear me? This is a German woman. But she didn't have blue eyes and blonde hair. They measured her scalp to be sure that she was pure Aryan race. Does this make sense to you? To determine somebody's ability or character based on the color of the skin or the color of the eye or the color of the hair? If you have an open mind, you will come to the same conclusion as Voltaire said in the 19th century, that prejudice and stereotyping is absurd. It doesn't make sense to determine somebody's ability or character of the color of the skin, the color of the eye, or where you come from, or the language you talk, or the religion that you practice. It doesn't make sense. This is how I looked when I was liberated. And this picture is a few months later, just to show you that if you have more or less a normal life, how your looks improve and how your feelings improve. Just gives you an idea how appreciated you have to be if you are not starving, if you are not being beaten the way I was beaten every day for no good reason. I couldn't go to school. I was awarded by WIENER Pacific College an honorary degree, and I was very humbled. I told the audience, this was a commencement, there were a few thousand people present. And I asked them, why do you give me such an honor? So the president, Barber, came to the audience and he said, because we learned something from you, because it's so relevant to know history and to learn from your experience. And our sages said thousands of years ago, who is a wise person? A wise person is the one that learns from his experience. But the wisest person is the one who learns from somebody else's experience. I got an honorary law degree by Lewis and Clark Law School. Why? Because the dean happened to read my book. And why did I write my book? I had no intention to write my book. I didn't feel qualified to write my book. But in one of my presentations in a church, at the end of my presentation, an older man approached me with tears in his eyes, and that is what he said. Mr. Wiener, I was an officer in the American Army in 1945. I was one of the liberators of Buchenwald, a very infamous camp. Please, for my children and for my grandchildren, put down in writing your experience in concentration camp. Do it for my children and for my grandchildren. That is the only reason I wrote that book. I have no financial interest in the book. I don't care if you buy it, but I would like you to read it, and it's available in all the public libraries. I had no idea that it's going to be a good book. It is not just a chapter on history. It is something that you learn from. If you go to page 158, you'll see a handwritten letter by an 8th grader that she intended to kill herself on Thursday. She left a note with the grandparents. But when she heard my story, she changed her mind. She did not kill herself. I have 88,000 letters, and among them there are 120 letters from young students, suicidal students, that they intended to kill themselves, but they changed their mind. They realized how lucky they are, how good their life is. At my age, they can relate to me, because this is an 8th grader. This is my age when I was taken to the camp. And I have so many of the same nature. You'll see over there a handwritten letter by a student in Jackson High School, here in Portland. Her mother passed away on ovarian cancer, and she was devastated. She was very close to her mother. And she had suicidal thoughts. But when she heard my story, that I lost 123 members of my extended family, my grandparents, my uncles, aunts, cousins, they were all murdered. I'm the only survivor of my immediate family. So then she said to herself, well, I'm still lucky. I have a daddy. I have grandparents. You, Mr. Wiener, lost everybody. you get a complete different perspective. I have letters from students who had psychological problems, and nothing helped them when they began to get help. And my presentation helped them because they realized how trivial their problems are in comparison to my problems at her age. I'm here today to share my story for 3 different reasons. One reason is a chapter on history that you should be aware of it. The other reason is that there are people who deny the Holocaust. They say it didn't happen. And there are people who are ignorant about the Holocaust. The other day, a teacher asked me to make him a copy how I looked after the war. So I went to King Court to make a copy. I didn't know how to operate the copy machine. I asked one of the helpers to help me. So he looked at the picture, and he looked at me, and he said, "This you? You're here. You don't look like a criminal." I told him, "I'm not a criminal. I'm a Holocaust survivor." He had no idea what I was talking about. I was shocked. He was brought up right here in Portland. And the other reason is that there are people who deny the Holocaust. Prominent people like the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, he said in the United Nations a few years ago that the Holocaust is a myth. How dare he say so? There is so much evidence. There are over 100 Holocaust museums all over the world. There are 36,000 books about the Holocaust. 12,000 were written by Holocaust survivors. And if you go to Germany, you can see those camps. You go to Dachau, Blechhammer, it's still there. How can anybody say it didn't happen? I wrote him 3 letters to the president of Iran a few years ago when he was president, Ahmadinejad. And I sent him pictures. How can you say it didn't happen? And you are a country of 70 million people, and you are telling you people that it did not happen? You're making a mockery out of yourself. And I did something else. I don't know how many of you are aware that I've been getting from Germany government every month a check. It is not for my suffering or for killing my family. It is a gesture of goodwill, as they call it. It's called Wiedergutmachung, a gesture of goodwill. I made a copy of the check and I sent it to the president of Iran. Why don't you get a check? Why do I get a check? How can you say it didn't happen? How can you tell your people it didn't happen? It is very unfortunate that there are people you cannot reason with them. Even though you have all the evidence, you cannot reason with them. What do you see here? That is how the system works. The Germans came to our home. They picked us up. The very young and the elderly, they were not sent to concentration camp. They were sent to killing centers because they don't fit for work. I was taken to camp, and my older brother, to use our strength to serve their economy as long as possible. But they're very young. My younger brother, at the age of 10, he didn't fit for work. So I found out after the war that on February 18, 1943, he was taken to Auschwitz, and he probably was murdered the same day, together with his mother. So people have the nerve to do. What do you see here? You see here the people who were picked up from their home, and right behind that are the trains who took those people to be exterminated. For many years, the people were taken first to be gassed, But in the very last 2 years, 43, 44, the transports who arrived to Auschwitz were so big, they didn't have time to gas them, so they were burned alive. They took those children and threw them into crematorium upon their arrival. This is all documented. Children. How did they have a heart to murder 1.5 million children, Jewish children, under the age of 14? Those who visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington probably saw those shoes. Those are the shoes taken away from those little children, murdering them the most brutal way. And why? What is their sin? Who had the heart to take a living child and threw them in an oven? But that is how it was. I know it might sound unbelievable, but again, I am not exaggerating. What do you see here? General Eisenhower gave an order to the liberators, take pictures of those liberated camps, because one day somebody might say it didn't happen. And unfortunately, he was so right. What do you see here? What did the American soldier, you can see Bradley, Patton, Eisenhower, that is what they found in those liberated camps. Thousands and thousands of dead bodies. And those who are still able to walk, they have a life. So people, please remember that the Holocaust, unfortunately, did happen. And this is one of those proof. The Nuremberg trial, you don't remember that, wasn't at your time. It took 10 months by the Russians, the English, and the Americans. They brought those leaders or those to justice. And they didn't deny the Holocaust. They just tried to defend themselves by saying we had to listen to Hitler. We had to obey to Hitler. They didn't deny the Holocaust. And there are some people today who dare to deny the Holocaust. What do you see here? This is in Ukraine. This picture was taken by a German soldier while he committed those terrible things. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian Jews were just shot with one bullet because they saved the bullets and buried half alive. 1.5 million Jewish people in the Ukraine, because in those times, 1941, Auschwitz didn't exist yet. That is how they were murdered. What do you see here? This picture was taken by a British soldier in Bergen-Belsen. Thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies. These are survivors. That man in the middle is my schoolmate. This picture was taken by an American soldier. He didn't live long. Thousands and thousands of Holocaust survivors died soon after the war because they couldn't digest the normal food given to them by the Americans or the British or the French. If you are deprived of basic nutrients for years, you cannot digest a hamburger. The body just didn't assimilate it. This was written by a German clergyman after the war. I would appreciate if all of you read this together so I can hear you. Go ahead. Thank you. What did you learn? Exactly what I mentioned before. Every Jew is a victim, but not every victim is a Jew. And hatred is just self-destructive. Please remember that. Hitler's problem was he didn't know how to love. He didn't love anybody. The only one that he did love was his mother. Anybody else who was even in the government, like Himmler, Goebbels, all those infamous names, he didn't like them. He just knew how to hate. If you watch any documentary and you see Hitler, you never see him smiling. He just was consumed by hatred. As a matter of fact, he didn't know even how to make love. His girlfriend, Eva Braun, she complained or confided to her girlfriend that he didn't know how to make love to her because he was just full of hatred. He should have consulted me. This is not my date, don't misunderstand. This is a German exchange student who came to the United States, and she came to my apartment in Hillsborough to interview me. At the door, she said, "You probably hate me." And I looked at her, "Why should I hate you? How can anybody hate such a beautiful girl?" Well, my grandfather was a Nazi, and we in the family know what he did. So you probably hate me. And I tried to convince her that I don't hate her because it doesn't make any sense to me. Is she responsible for the action or inaction of her grandfather? Think about it. We are all responsible for our own action. And we became very good friends. And her parents came later to visit in the United States. Her father came to see me in Hillsborough. And he asked me, "Mr. Wiener, do you hate me?" I said, "When were you born?" He said, 1950. You were born in 1950, 4 years after the war. Do I have a reason to hate you? It doesn't make sense. You have to judge each individual on his own merits. It reminds me, the other day I spoke at Concordia University. And one of the students stands up and he said, "Mr. Wiener, you keep saying that Hitler considered you to be inferior because you happen to be a Jewish boy. Wasn't Albert Einstein a Jew?" So, yes, Albert Einstein happened to be a Jew. And he happened to be a genius. He was not a genius because he was a Jew. He just happened to be a genius and happened to be a Jew. But he was not inferior, for heaven's sake. Jonas Salk, the one who invented vaccination against polio, according to my reading, he saved 700 million lives. Do you hear me? He saved 700 million lives by this invention against polio. According to Hitler, Jonas Salk was inferior because he happened to be a Jewish person. Does this make sense to you? If you have an open mind, you'll come to the same conclusion that prejudice and stereotyping is absurd. This is one of the schools when I spoke. And they decided to make a play based on my life story. And you see here one girl, she approached me and she said to me, I heard you, but I didn't see you. I didn't get what she meant, but the principal was sitting next to me, told me, this girl is legally blind, so she didn't see you. But she heard you. And then later on, I got an email from her. I don't know how she functions in the school, telling me, you saved my life. Why? Because I mentioned in my presentation that under Hitler, any baby that was born with any kind of disability or handicap was murdered because Hitler didn't want any sick people. So she realizes if she would be born in Germany, she would be killed as an infant because she had a problem with her vision. And she was so miserable. But then when I explained it to her, she realized that how lucky she is that she lives in this country. According to my reading, 250,000 babies were murdered by German babies, were murdered by the Germans because they were born with any kind of disability. Is this right? Ordinarily, the teachers all invite parents to come to my presentation. And in one of my presentations in an elementary school in Portland, a mother, her name is Trudy Ludwig, who is a very famous author of children's book. When she heard my story, and I didn't tell you this before, that at one point a German woman risked her life to save my life. So she wrote a book, it's very popular, and the name of the book is Gift from the Enemy. And what happened is, in one of the camps, Gross Maslowitz, I worked in a factory together with German women, workers. Most of the workers in all the factories were females because all the able men were drafted to the army. And there were signs all over the factory telling in the German language, addressed to the German employees, don't give anything to the prisoners, don't talk to them, don't make even eye contact with them. And if you do, you are doomed. One day, while I was standing there and taking apart a machine, a German middle-aged woman on the way to the restroom did make eye contact with me. And she hinted to me with her finger like that. I had no idea what she meant. I was very curious. And I had to watch myself that nobody should see me approaching that indicated spot. Eventually, I did find the right moment, and I approached that indicated spot, and what happened? I found a sandwich of 2 slices of white bread with a piece of cheese. I could consume that sandwich only if I went to the laboratory, because if somebody would have noticed me, there would be a problem. But what's interesting is that that German woman left a sandwich for me every day on the same spot for 30 days. In other words, she risked her life for me, not one, 30 times. Every time when she put that sandwich over there, she risked her life. Why did she do it? What motivated to risk her life for a Jewish boy? She read in the paper, or she heard on the radio, there were no televisions in those days, that I'm an inferior, that I'm worthless. Why did she risk her life for me? She was a German woman. I will never know. But I do know that she gave me hope, because 3 weeks before that, a German guard punched me and knocked out most of my teeth. I have no teeth. These are dentures. He was a German, and she was a German. They are both German nationals. But look at the difference. One was a murderer, and the other German risked her life for me. What did I learn? That you are going to find good people and bad people in every group. How can I hate the German people when I'm thinking about that German woman who risked her life for me 30 times? I can just tell you that after the war, as soon as I was free, I wanted to look for her. I made all kinds of attempts to find her, to thank her for risking her life for me. But I didn't know her name. I didn't know her address. But she did risk her life for me. And the interesting part is, I could never find her. Not a long time ago, about 2 years ago, South Salem High School, that I spoke over there 11 times. They decided to honor that German woman, and they erected a monument in the school, in the yard of the school, for that German woman who risked her life for me. But there is a message here which is so important, and that is what it is. I cannot judge the entire German people, because look, this German woman risked her life for me. At another point, I was digging a trench, and a German guard threw a brown bag with a piece of bread for me. By doing so, he risked his promotion or maybe his life. So you can find good people and bad people everywhere. Please remember that. I assume that you must have a lot of questions for me, and if you have any questions for me, go ahead.
How many people survived after the war? After the war, how many people survived?
80% of the Jewish people were murdered, and 20% did survive. So it depends on what country. In Poland, for example, before the war, there were 3.5 million people, and only 200,000 survived. It depends upon the country, but basically 80% of the Jewish people were murdered in the Holocaust. And in other groups, for example, like Jehovah's Witnesses, most of the Jehovah's Witnesses, German Jehovah's Witnesses, were annihilated because they, according to their belief, they couldn't join the German army, so they were murdered. There was a Jehovah's Witness camp right next to our camp, and I could see how other nationalities or minorities were murdered. And how about all those undesirables? The Germans found anybody undesirable, or he was disabled, he's useless, so they killed him. You know how many Germans were killed in World War II? 9 million Germans were killed in World War II. Most of them were civilians. What did Hitler gain by the war? What this hostility helped the German people? It doesn't help. As I said before, hatred is self-destructive.
How do you feel when you speak to an audience like this audience who is not familiar with the Holocaust? How does that make you feel that you're educating them?
As I said before, I had no intention to write a book, and I had no intention to speak to audiences. I never did it in New York. But when I see the impact that it has on so many lives, I just said it before. I have it in writing from young people that they wrote to me that they were suicidal, and because of my sharing my story, they changed their mind. And this is there. I mean, if you have a chance to read my book, you do not have to buy it. It's available in the library. You go to page 158, and you see a handwritten letter from Patton Middle School, McMinnville, that she was suicidal and she changed her mind. And I have many instances like that. And I'm by myself, obviously, I'm very gratified. You know, if you ever visited the state of Israel, you'll see each ambulance has a slogan: if you save one life, you save the entire world. That is the way I feel. And I'm obviously very gratified that I'm able to contribute to saving lives.
All right, so those of you that still have some questions, again, your teachers will have an opportunity to kind of work with you around those questions, and we're going to gather them and share them back with Alter and see if we can have a bit of a dialogue as the months go by, as he continues to work on his initiative for mandated Holocaust education here in the state of Oregon. As the representative of Lake Ridge, I want to thank you for coming and being here today. We oftentimes talk about the Pacer family, and once a Pacer, always a Pacer. And as the principal of Lake Ridge High School, I would like to welcome you to our family of Pacers. It's a small gift, but it's cold outside, so we wanted to make sure that you were taken care of. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.
You're wonderful.
Thank you very much. You're a very good audience. And I hope you have a very meaningful life. A meaningful life.